There are some that consider it to be a lazy and uninspired form of music production, and others who consider it to be the future of the entire medium. No matter where you stand on the spectrum, however, one thing's for certain: sampling has made its mark in the music industry. What's up, everybody? My name is Aiden. You may know me as Nightowl, and today we're going to dive straight into the history of sampling and its uses in music production. Let's get into it. In the modern world of music, sampling has become somewhat of a commonplace tactic. Internet music genres such as the now ubiquitous vaporwave and its subgenre future funk, though arguably it's its own genre at this point, rely heavily on sampling to achieve a very specific aesthetic. Hip-hop is notorious for its sampling work, sometimes going so far as to take an existing beat and just, rapping over it. In today's video, however, I want to take a look at some of the history of sampling, the genres it's most heavily used in, and of course, the production techniques that surround it. So sit back and relax, because we're about to dive into the history of sampling, from Daft Punk to future funk. Sampling as a technique goes as far back as the 1940s with, of course, a French composer known as Pierre-Marie Schaeffer, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, who created sound collages by recording various sounds to tape. These sounds included anything from kitchen utensils to locomotives. A fun fact, after Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd recorded an album called Household Objects that was created using, you guessed it, household objects. This album never saw the light of day, but it is interesting that 30 years later, Pierre's style was still in use, at least somewhat. However, this form of sampling would be much more tedious without the help of a sampler. That's right, samplers are tools used to record little snippets of sound and then play them back, allowing for a greater range of creative freedom. Artists could record pre-existing guitar riffs or vocals from other records into the sampler and essentially use the sample as a new instrument. The first digital sampler, called the EMS Musis, was invented by Peter Zinoviev in 1969 and was soon followed up by a multitude of other samplers. Famously, in 1988, Akai released the first ever MPC sampler, which allowed musicians to assign samples to pads and play them like a drum kit. Of course, nowadays we have the greatest sampler of all time, YouTube to MP3. We no longer have to worry about technical limitations, which can breed both innovation and, in some cases, laziness, as we will see. Now, as many of you probably already know, sampling is most commonly used in the hip-hop community, often in the form of remixing or just the use of small loops taken from other songs. This style of sampling gave hip-hop a very distinct style in its early years, and the practice is still going on to this day. However, most of what needs to be said about sampling in hip-hop has already been said, and as you can probably see by the title, I'm more interested in exploring the dance side of things, specifically French house and future funk. French house started back in the 90s, with French musicians taking heavy inspiration from the disco and space disco scenes of the 70s. One of the earliest examples of French house was the album Dance by the Earth People, released under Apexton Records in 1990. However, in 1995, a certain robot made French house history with the creation of the label known as Roulé. This label later went on to release works by Stardust and Alan Braxe, and although it is relatively unknown nowadays, it is said that this is the first time a French house style was really established. Thomas Bangalter, the founder, later went on to make international fame with fellow musician Guy Manuel de Homem Christo and their album Homework. Yep, we're talking about Daft Punk. Now, I've skipped over a bunch of history, including Cassius and of course Guy Manuel's label, Crytamore. If you want a more in-depth look at Crytamore, I recommend checking Pat Chennington's video on the topic. I'll leave a little thing in the top right of the screen. Anyways, back to Homework. This album pretty much put French house in the public eye, using the now ubiquitous tactic of looping disco samples and putting a 4-on-the-floor beat on top. Homework became an international success. However, it wouldn't be Daft Punk's most influential work. No, that would come 4 years later, in 2001, with Discovery, an absolutely monumental album that forever changed dance music. There's so much to say about Discovery, but for the sake of time, I'd just like to look at specifically its sampling and some of the techniques it used. Right from the start, we see disco samples used heavily, with One More Time's now infamous sampled intro from More Spell on You by Eddie Johns. Using sidechain compression, Daft Punk creates a powerful kick that really makes his track infectious. What makes Discovery interesting is its combination of synthesizers and samples. Just look at Superheroes, for instance. single bar loop is repeated for the entire song, and if it weren't for the added instrumentation, this loop would get pretty boring. But using a powerful kick and the almost triumphant progression of the synthesizers, Daft Punk creates a truly memorable piece. And these tactics are used on every track on the album. Personally, this is one of my favorite albums of all time, and my favorite Daft Punk album. Now, let's skip ahead a little bit to 2007 with Justice's first release, the Cross album. Although it uses similar techniques as Daft Punk's Discovery in terms of sampling, Justice managed to create something entirely different with the Cross album. The sounds are grungy, dark, and distorted. The bass lines are powerful, but in many cases funky. Justice also picks from a wide range of samples, including the traditional practice of using forgotten disco samples, but also some more left field picks such as the Godzilla theme. Yeah, that's right. And the Apple sound effects. I'm telling you, they're innovative. I feel that the Cross album opened up a lot of new possibilities for artists, and the next time we would see these techniques used in full force wouldn't be until 2011 with the now infamous Floral Shop. Yep, that's where we're heading. Floral Shop, released by Macintosh Plus, which is an alias of Vectroid, used slowdown samples that stretched out for minutes and minutes on end. They often consisted of lost 80s songs and forgotten video game samples. Of course, Floral Shop isn't the first Vaporwave release ever, and that could be a whole nother video if I dive into that right now, but it's important as a release because it marked the first time Vaporwave garnered a community and a general style. Throughout the 2010s, Vaporwave gained immense popularity online, and a number of subgenres spawned. Enter St. Pepsi. In May 2013, St. Pepsi released the now historic hit Vibes, arguably one of the first future funk albums ever. This album used a lot of disco and, with minimal edits, mostly retained the same chord structures and vocals. The drums and bass were heavily enhanced, and the tracks were all highly compressed to give it that almost cheap sound. Interestingly, St. Pepsi used a Japanese city pop sample on this album, namely Love Talkin' by Tatsuro Yamashita. The use of 80s city pop samples has since become a staple in the future funk genre. In 2014, Macross 8299 released A Million Miles Away, an album that relied heavily on city pop samples to achieve its aesthetic. And later in 2014, Young Bae released his debut, titled simply Bae, which fused both city pop and classic disco. However, there was a major problem with this style, and that was of course that not much of the original source material was really changed. Sure, maybe the tracks were pitch shifted and edits were made here and there, but for the most part, the samples were mostly unchanged. To this day, there's a great amount of discussion surrounding quote-unquote laziness in future funk production. And yeah, I can see where this definitely can be a problem, especially if these artists start to become big off of essentially other people's work. That aside, there are a few artists in today's scene that really focus on the French house aesthetic and change a lot of the source material around, similar to what Daft Punk did back in 2001. Introducing Montaigne Records, created by Alex Galetis, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, aka FIBRE, which specializes in the French house and disco house genres. Of course, there is a touch of future funk thrown in, but if you listen to anything off Montaigne, you can really see the Daft Punk / Justice influence. And it's really nice to see artists in this scene do a little more than just speed up a track and add drums. Well, that kind of brings us to present day. And that being said, there are still aspects of sampling that I want to talk about, specifically on the production side of things, so let's get into that. Electronic music, specifically French house and future funk in this case, have very distinct production styles. I'm going to hop into Logic to show you what I mean. The first key feature that you see in any of these genres is of course the sample chop. Sometimes producers pick out a loopable section of the song, and other times they just combine different parts of the song to create an entirely new loop. And here's a loop I made consisting of several different pieces stitched together. In some cases, specifically in future funk, most of the song is actually just recycled, though edited a bit to give it that remix style. Check out anything by Young Bae or St. Pepsi to get what I mean. Now, the most prominent feature of any of these tracks is going to be the drums. Without a solid drum foundation, your track is just going to fall apart. Of course, most producers like Daft Punk, or even the more contemporary artists like BarbWalters or FIBRE, use a 4-on-the-floor beat, which goes like this. As a matter of fact, this pattern was the basic disco drum pattern, which of course forever changed dance music. However, specifically in these genres, the most important aspect of the drums is going to be the sidechain compression. Basically, sidechain compression is the process by which a compressor dips the volume of your channel every time the instrument assigned to that sidechain hits. So, with our example, every time the kick hits, the volume of the sample dips. This production technique is used by almost every producer of these genres, and essentially gives your drums an amplified power to really get people dancing. In some tracks, specifically on the French house side of things, phasing and bit crushing is used to create an almost textured sound. However, in both future funk and French house, filters are used extensively to build and drop energy levels. In most cases, low pass and high pass filters are used to create this effect, though a bandpass is also very useful as well. So there you have it, the main production techniques used in French house and future funk. It's interesting to see how far back these techniques have been around, as well as how some of them were directly inspired by disco. And hopefully you might be able to use some of these in your own tracks. So, from Daft Punk to future funk, we looked at the history of sampling, its specific uses in electronic music, and the way samples are manipulated and produced, all to gain a better understanding of this sort of culture that is developed around the practice. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe for more content on future funk, vaporwave, and anything else I feel like talking about really. I plan on making a lot more of these videos, and to be honest, I glossed over a lot of important details, so hopefully in future uploads, I'll explore some of these artists in more depth. With that being said, thank you all for watching, and have a great day.